Everybody, I want to welcome you to our session on African American archaeology in Jefferson County. We are fortunate to have several speakers that are going to be talking about some of the work or research we've been doing, as well as Jeffrey Shanks as our discussant. For this session, ladies and gentlemen, as anybody who attended the morning session on African American archaeology around the state knows, there is likely to be a desire to ask questions or to discuss. For this one, we want to have our speakers able to use the 20-minute section. That's why we have the discussant. So if you have questions, I want everybody to be able to answer them. We want to have a good, discussion at the end, with Jeff's review, and then everybody that wants to ask questions. But I would ask you, please, if you could let the presenters do their talks and hold your questions until the discussion period after our five speakers speak. I would greatly appreciate it. I want to do the opening paper on archaeological markers of African American life in Jefferson County. We're titling this one A Comparison of 4 Plantation Sites. As we will talk about, and as we hope to delve into more, ladies and gentlemen, in the succeeding papers and in discussion at the end, we want to recognize that in Jefferson County in particular, the modern day African American communities in many cases can be directly tied to the historical sites for reasons we will discuss throughout our session. While the African American history of Florida goes back to the beginnings of the early contact period, archaeological study of American plantations in Florida has been nearly non-existent until recently. And I hasten to say American plantations, not, archaeological studies of plantation sites in Florida have been primarily limited to Second Spanish period sites such as Kingsley Plantation north of Jacksonville, with almost no intensive testing or excavation of antebellum American plantations in Florida having been completed. This lack of detailed archaeological study at American plantations in Florida leaves a gap in our understanding of the development of black communities in many areas of Florida. Historical evidence, including both written documents and oral history, suggests that antebellum plantations in certain areas of Florida became the centers of settlement and community growth after the Civil War and into the 20th century. In particular, Jefferson County in the northwestern Big Bend and Panhandle area of Florida became a center of African American settlement and culture based in large part on the number of plantations worked with enslaved labor, which existed in the region prior to the Civil War. After the end of the war and the Reconstruction era, Jefferson County had numerous black settlements and communities, largely based in areas which had been plantations, with formerly enslaved people and their descendants using land and institutions created during the time of enslavement. For this reason, it is important to understand what an antebellum plantation in Jefferson County would have looked like, including the spatial and social relationships between the planters and their dwellings and the enslaved laborers and theirs. It is equally important to understand the ways in which later cultural institutions within black communities in this area had their origins in and developed from earlier institutions which were created on the plantations of the area, as our succeeding papers will discuss in greater detail. This paper will present the results of archaeological study of 4 plantation sites located in Jefferson County. The Collins Pond South Site, HJE 2069, the Razor Plantation Site, HJE 2121, the Bailey Panola Site, HJE 2179, and the Gamble Quarter Site, HJE 2212. The research questions driving study of these sites were as follows. What archaeological assemblage marks a plantation site in Jefferson County, including both artifacts and features? What types of spatial and structural features mark black community sites associated with Jefferson County plantations? And last, what cultural institutions in the modern community can be historically and archaeologically associated with antebellum plantations in this region? The results of historical and archaeological study of each site will first be presented. These results will then be compared and their implications discussed, as well as avenues for long-term research in this area to be considered. The Collins Pond South Site, HJE 2069, was tested during the 2020 field season of ARI's Jefferson County Historical Site Survey. Historical records suggest that the site represents the remains of the Osceola Place plantation, owned by Thomas and Laura Randall, daughter and son-in-law to William Wirt, Attorney General for Andrew Jackson, and his wife Elizabeth. The Randalls settled in Jefferson County in 1826, immediately before the county itself was created. This plantation was created prior to the Civil War and maintained with the Randalls Belmont Plantation, with assistance from their cousins John and Robert Gamble, until its transfer by the Randalls to an S. Sumter and David Carn prior to the Civil War. An 1867 freedmen's contract lists freedmen and freedwomen contracted to work at and resident on the site for that year's field labor. Interviews with local residents suggested the site continued to have a number of black families living there through the beginning of the 1900s, after which time the site was abandoned. During archaeological testing at the site, an area was located on the western side of the property with a heavy concentration of historical ceramics, glass, and metal on the ground surface. These materials included creamware, white pearlware, and blue-on-white feather-edge pearlware, as well as brown salt glazed stoneware and a fragment of actual slipware, all associated with the British and Second Spanish period in Florida, with some whiteware and refined earthenwares also present. Now, whitewares represented only 24% of the ceramic sample at this site, with the remaining 76% older varieties. The glass recovered at the site included bubbled olive, aqua, and patinated brown and clear glass, all dating to the 19th century. Approximately 400 meters east of this area, across a small pond, similar ceramics were recovered in smaller quantities from an area near the remains of a wooden structure. The remaining walls and floor of the structure were placed on pilings of soft mud, locally made brick, and were made of hand-hewn boards. The nails in the walls and floor were 19th century cut nails, with the artifacts that we found in this area located about 5 meters west of the structure in a scatter that ran some 40 meters to the south. This structure is extremely similar to those known to be used by enslaved laborers and sharecroppers in this area. I apologize for the blurriness of this photo, but the structure we found, the remnants were basically the floors that you see here and a small portion of the walls on top of the pilings that existed. Now, the Gamble Quarter Site, 8J 2212, is located south of Highway 27 on the western side of Jefferson County. This site represents a part of the Walkeena Plantation property founded and owned by John Gamble in 1827, west of his brother Robert Gamble's Willani Plantation, which was founded in 1826, the same year as Osceola Place. Both Gamble brothers came from Virginia and brought enslaved laborers with them. And as many of you are aware, they owned more land further to the south. This is the standing house that still remains on the Gamble Plantation site that is near Ellington today. The area tested during this survey was 300 meters north of the main house in an area which was reported by the current owner to represent an area where the community had indicated enslaved laborers once lived. Testing in this area produced numerous ceramics, including creamware, both blue and white transfer printed pearlware, other refined earthenwares, and whiteware, both plain and blue and white transfer printed. And again, as with the Osceola Place site, whitewares represented only 23% of this ceramic sample, the later American ceramics. The remaining 77% is composed of older ceramics associated normally with the British and Second Spanish period. Glass fragments recovered included olive, aqua, and clear glass fragments, all of which were bubbled and hand blown. We're not talking about modern bottle glass, we're talking about stuff that is clearly datable to the earlier to mid-19th century. Intriguingly, 3 expedient tools made from chert, 2 of them thermally altered, were also recovered at this site, suggesting the site had a previous Native American occupation. Now, a quarter mile east of the area possessing the ceramics, the remains of an area which appears to have been a brickery and a pugging mill were found, where we located an exposed clay seam, water ponds, and numerous iron and clay concretions in the soil. This is consistent with historical data indicating that plantation brickeries worked by enslaved people were present at many of the plantations in Jefferson County. Now, the enslaved people of both the Walkeena Plantation and the Willani Plantation created a church still known as Willani Church at the time of emancipation immediately following the Civil War. This church is located approximately 3 miles east of the Gamble Quarter site and remains active to the present day, with an associated cemetery located 2 miles south of the church structure. Local informants indicated that the church was moved to its present location from an area immediately beside the cemetery when the current landowners purchased the property. The Razor Plantation site, AJ 2197, is located in the eastern part of Jefferson County near the Osceola River. This was founded by the Razor family prior to the Civil War. The precise date of the plantation settlement is not certain, although we know, of course, it was occupied by 1860. Alfred W. Razor, a medical doctor, died and was interred at the site in 1856. This is his crypt, while his son, Alfred Razor Jr., and his cousin, John Razor, appeared to have occupied the site until a few years after the Civil War. Now, archaeological investigation of the area of the Razor Plantation, which local information suggested was the area of the main house, produced creamware, several varieties of pearlware, including blue and white, or white and blue on white feather edged and whiteware, both plain and transfer printed. As with the Collins Pond site, the whiteware was a minority of the assemblage, constituting only 41% of the total, a bit more here than you saw at the other sites, but still a minority ware. Brick fragments at the site were all 19th century soft mud bricks. There's no later machine cut brick or anything else there. It's a variety, again, known to be locally made within Jefferson County by enslaved labor. Approximately 200 meters east of this area, believed to represent the main house structure, we found a second smaller concentration of artifacts with blue and white pearlware, more soft mud brick fragments, and interestingly, severed pieces of squared limestone structural fragments, possibly representing the remains of a building piling or chimney. Now, local informants indicated that a number of African American houses were located within a quarter mile of the area believed to be the main house for the Razor Plantation. Time constraints did not let us test in that area in greater detail, although we were able to do survey approximately a half mile east of the area tested during this research. The Mays-Williams Cemetery, an African American cemetery, was also investigated, again with information and permission from some of the descendants. This site had numerous unmarked burial trenches, as well as several visible concrete and marble monuments. Members of the families interred at the site that we were able to interview indicated that it had been used since slavery days, quote unquote. The last of the four sites we're looking at here is the Bailey Panola site. It's approximately a half mile to the west of the Razor Plantation site. This site represents the remains of a house built by William J. Bailey, one of the earlier settlers, along with the Bellamys in that area, for his son and family in 1854. This house is kind of a time capsule because it was abandoned after the Civil War, shortly before being destroyed in a fire. The Salem AME Church Cemetery is located on the same property a quarter mile distant near a pond, and both the cemetery and the nearby church for which it is named are known to have been created by descendants of formerly enslaved people who worked for the Bellamy and Bailey families. This area was known as the Turkey Scratch Place in the 19th century, and there are 4 Jefferson County freedmen's contracts in the Florida archives between one of the landowners, Burton W. Bellamy, and the freedman George Anderson, Gib Bellamy, Benjamin Nathans, and Henry K. Small. And all of these, of course, date to the year 1867. They described work that was being performed in this area by the formerly enslaved workers. Archaeological testing at this site recovered pearlware, whiteware, fragments of salt glazed stoneware representing the remains of the crop. Whitewares again represented 42% of this sample. Nails recovered from testing were all 19th century square cut. There's no earlier forged nails, and there's nothing that's wire drawn or later 20th century material. In this series of tests, we found more than 200 fragments of locally made soft mud brick. And about 300 meters east of this site, we actually found the remains of what we believe to be the brickery that produced these bricks. There's an exposed clay seam in the area. There were several sun-dried bricks in the soil immediately beside, and a pond that presumably would have provided the water source. Thus, it is likely that the bricks which were used in this structure were made at this site directly. Now, taking all of these data into account and considering our first research question, a noticeable element of the artifact assemblages from all 4 sites is the relatively high number of ceramics which are normally more associated with the historical periods prior to American settlement. While pearlwares are found at American territorial sites, it's unusual to have them present in higher quantities than whitewares and other American-produced wares normally associated with 19th century American sites. Since the Osceola Place and the Walkeena plantations were founded early, 1826 and 1827 respectively, by planters coming in the one case from South Carolina and the other from Virginia, some of the higher proportion of these wares could be attributed to Americans bringing heirloom wares with them during initial settlement. However, the razor plantation was more likely founded in the later 1830s or early 1840s, and we know beyond question Panola was founded in 1854, long after American settlement had begun in this region. White wares and later American wares contributed significantly less than half the assemblage at these sites as well. So accounting in terms of the archaeological markers in this area for the presence of older ceramics, it's helpful to remember that despite this area's proximity to Florida's capital and the ownership of Jefferson County lands by many political and economic leaders, the area was considered a frontier with poor means of travel and communication well into the 1850s and 1858 when you see the building of the first railroad through this area. Despite the wealth of this area's planters and their connections with the political leaders of the time, these sites may reflect restricted access to the material goods due to the fact that you've got these conditions. The same phenomenon accounts for the number of plantation brickeries associated with these sites and with the area. The local manufacturing and use of bricks at these sites likely reflects the use of local materials and the labor of enslaved people to produce goods which were too expensive and difficult to transport into this area until nearly the time of the Civil War. Now, looking at the second research question as to how the earlier plantation communities led to the later black communities of this region, it's important to note that planters settling in Jefferson County did not have access to a market for enslaved people in this area until many years after settlement began. For this reason, nearly all planters brought their enslaved laborers in larger groups from the areas they left, which for Jefferson County was primarily South Carolina or Virginia in the early period of settlement. This is definitely the case for the Osceola Place and Walkeena plantations and may have been true for the Razor plantation as well. In other areas of the American South which have had longer and more detailed plantation studies, it is known that the homes and settlements of enslaved people were frequently at a significant distance from the homes of the planters and blocked from view by natural features or by distance. The site studied here, as well as others located in Jefferson County, such as Glendower Plantation, appear to follow this pattern as well. Thus, living areas for enslaved people at Jefferson County plantations would have been placed at significant distances from the residences of the plantation owners, though certain types of plantation owners, such as cooks, likely had their residences closer to the planters' houses and may have maintained a special status. Based on historical evidence, as well as the structural remains found at the Collins Pond South site, these structures were simpler wooden buildings with packed earth or raised wooden floors, based on what we've seen, likely similar to the ones that you see here. And clusters that were on plantation land, but mostly distant from the planter's view and direct control. Finally, considering the third research question, the primary cultural institutions in the modern community which can be traced to enslaved people of the antebellum plantations are the region's black churches and cemeteries. At both the Panola and the Razor plantation sites, cemeteries located on the properties by local residents' talk and continued use in some cases can be directly traced to slavery days based on community oral histories. The Salem AME Church, associated with the Salem AME Cemetery near the Panola site, has been in existence since the 1870s, and other cemetery and church sites are even older, as will be discussed in the fourth paper in this session. Religious institutions created by enslaved people allowed them to negotiate a part of their living conditions with the enslavers, and after emancipation and Reconstruction, helped to provide continuity of practice and belief through the modern day. Thus, the antebellum plantations in Jefferson County provided the nucleus of black communities in this area and allowed for enslaved people to create institutions which, in a number of cases, continue to be present in the modern community. As the remaining papers in this session will discuss, these sites and institutions directly tie the antebellum people of Jefferson County with their modern descendants and provide direct and active links between this area's past and present. Now, this paper was written purely from an archaeological perspective, but of course we have a vastly greater wealth of data. One of the things that makes this area different, hold on just a moment, is that we have access. We've talked about in some of the earlier sessions, descendant communities. As we will talk about, I think we want to take a step further beyond that. It is better to allow the descendants and folks who have this knowledge to speak for themselves. With that being said, our second paper and third paper are being given by two descendants and members of the community. The first is Ms. Jacqueline Seabrooks, who is a local historian and is going to be speaking about, one moment, there we go, the relationship between cemeteries and families, honoring legacy, memory, and connection. Jackie, we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Seabrooks, and Dr. Boyer graciously always calls me a historian. But I will try to give you some information about a cluster of cemeteries in the area where I live that I have been around and visited. Just to give you a little of my background, I love browsing through cemeteries. I think they tell so much history, and it's amazing the stories that just the headstones in some instances tell us. So they're more than just resting places. They elicit memories of families. When I go through a cemetery, sometimes I just look at the born dates when they passed away and just kind of imagine what may have been going on in that area where I live at that time in history. So this presentation explores how cemeteries reflect and shape family relationships across generations. As far as I can go back, at least 4 generations in my family in that area. So, families visit cemeteries to remember loved ones. Gravestones and monuments often tell stories of family history. And coming up to Mother's Day, my ritual is I always visit my grandmother, my mother, aunts, and place flowers. So that's kind of my ritual for Mother's and Father's Day, and I know a lot of people do that, especially where I come from. So we're going to specifically talk about the Stokes, Sanders, Brown, and Fagley cemeteries, which are in the Dills community. Dills is located in the uppermost northeast corner of Jefferson County. I think I measured it on our property appraiser's map. We're about 2 miles from the Georgia line. And if you know anything about North Florida, we're about 10 miles west of the Madison County line. So we're sitting right up there in that corner of Jefferson County. Jefferson County runs from the Georgia line to the Gulf of Mexico, just to give you some idea. Cemeteries can tell you things about social status, family size. My family has a family plot. I've already said this is where I want to be. And my grandfather, and from his generation, you go out into the cemetery that's next to the church that we attend, you will see groupings of families buried in those family plots. Whereas some cemeteries now, it's like when you pass away, it's the next one in line. My family cemeteries, you see family plots. So Dills is a pretty close-knit community. I remember when there were many homes and houses, and some people lived on some of the local plantations. Those houses have been torn down. I have relatives that worked on the plantations when I was younger. And some of the surrounding plantations are not farming plantations anymore, but there are people that still work there. So we talk about some of the tangible links from the past to the future generations. And this is something that I discovered. Dr. Boyer had brought his students out to clean up the Stokes Cemetery. And I was just walking around the cemetery. And I had always heard this name. This is my paternal grandmother's father. Did not know he was buried in that cemetery until I went walking around that day and stumbled up on it. Certain kind of feeling that I just can't explain to you right now about stumbling up on his grave. So he was born in 1850, well into slavery, died in 1934. So he was about 83, 84 years old when he died. Always heard the stories about him. You can look at this headstone. Probably somebody actually drew those letters with something, and just the year he was born and the year he passed away. So it's possible that headstone may have been placed years after he was gone. Just to give you some context of where these 4 cemeteries are kind of located. So you see the Stokes Cemetery, the Sanders, the Fagley, and the Jeff Brown. When I was a kid, where you see Stokes and Sanders, now, I believe all of that was one cemetery. But this is on a plantation. Those cemeteries have never been recorded as separate pieces of property. So the plantation for Stokes has just fenced off what basically are headstones. There is a big oak a little north of that line of Stokes where my great-great-grandmother may have been buried. Nobody remembers exactly where. There was no permanent marker. So she's probably lost to us because we won't be able to probably find her. Sanders, we believe to be the former plantation owners, and even though I may have some pictures as we go on, you can see that they're fenced in, which most of the plantation owners were, and then the rest of the cemetery was probably enslaved folks and their descendants. Fagley is also not fenced in. It is not a black cemetery, it is a family cemetery, and the Fagleys lived in this area. This land has all been sold, and the plantation owns it as well. But the interesting thing about Jeff Brown is that Jeff Brown was a mulatto that we believe owned a lot of property, and he may have been a descendant of the Sanders plantation owners. This is a plotted piece of land that's a cemetery. There may be a picture in here as well if I have time. So these families are all interconnected. Jeff Brown bought, sold property, so he may have had a certain status in our community. So we talked about the Sanders, the Browns, the Stokes, how they may be interconnected. Like I said, Sanders family is believed to have owned a great deal of this property that we now know as Pinckney Hill Plantation in our area. The Browns are believed through Jeff Brown to be descendants of the Sanders family, and the Stokes are descendants of the Sanders and Browns family. In fact, he was a local pioneer family in our area. The picture to your left is a picture of Jeff Brown and his wife, Lucy. This is James Jim Stokes, who, based on some family information, was the son of Jeff Brown. So it's believed that he may have also, Jeff Brown was the son of the plantation owner. So some of the ties that bind is kind of how I wanted to kind of encapsulate this. So Jefferson Benjamin Smith Brown was born a mulatto slave in Jefferson County in October 23, 1864. His mother married the slave Benjamin Smith. For some reason, Jefferson Benjamin Smith took on the name Brown. Based on conversations with family, not quite sure where the Brown, why he chose that. But Jeff and his wife actually sharecropped 70 acres on the old Stokes place. So there's at some point, there were some Stokes that owned some of that plantation, is based on some of the information that I received. But it's all now part of Pinckney Hill again, and the farm was owned by a Mr. Sanders at some point. This is just some additional information about a Samuel Stokes, and we believe that's probably why it was called the Stokes Place, where Jeff and his wife sharecropped. And again, we have reason to believe, just based on my memory, that Stokes and Sanders cemetery were actually one cemetery, with the plantation owners buried up in the wrought iron enclosed fence. Is somebody tiny? I remember the Fagleys having property going all the way down to the Osceola and the Osceola River, having grown up in that neighborhood. So based on some of the deeds and some of the information that I was given by a family member, the Fagleys may have actually purchased some of the Brown property. And again, the Jeff Brown is the only one that's deeded, that we can find deeded to keep it hopefully preserved. So some of these cemeteries, when you go into them, even into the Stokes Cemetery, you can see status, because you can see the headstones that are very nice, and they tell a lot of details, and they have the obelisks and all this on top of it, even though they're in the black cemeteries. And then you have my great-great-grandfathers, who just may have been placed there, may have been even created by some cement or something to make it a headstone, and somebody drew his name in. So even going into some of these black cemeteries, and this was interesting to me, because if you know anything about that emblem, this was in the Sanders portion of the cemetery, and this is in the Stokes portion of the cemetery, that same emblem. So Mr. Sanders probably was one of the plantation owners, had money, was able to do a little bit more as far as marking his life and his death, versus Mr. Seabrooks, who I believe is one of my descendants, but also wanted to his family wanted to acknowledge him in that way. The importance of preservation. Just in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of deterioration in local cemeteries. You know, if it's associated with a church, the church usually preserves it fairly well. If there are still families living in the area, they tend to take care of the cemeteries. But like the Stokes portion of the cemetery, for instance, over the years it had been overgrown, and Dr. Boyer brought his students out, and they did a beautiful job cleaning it up. That's why I found my great-grandfather. But most of the people that are buried in that cemetery, they don't have any direct descendants still left. You know, you can walk the cemeteries, you can see some of the common names, and you know the families that were there before, and you can assume that they are related, but most of them, even myself, as I get older, it's like, who's gonna carry on that work? Who's gonna identify who those people may have been, where they may have lived? And I was fortunate enough, because my dad would tell me a lot of stuff about the families, and I got to write some of it down. And so I think the educational value as open air museum, like I said, I love going through the cemeteries. I love thinking what those stories probably were. And my odd hobby is collecting obituaries. Because I can't remember all the stuff that my dad used to tell me, but I can go back to some of those obituaries and I can figure out who, and even in my family, our connections and the mothers or the grandmothers of certain folks. And then when you walk through the cemeteries, you can tie all of that together where people are buried. And because most of the folks in my community are gone. I am the older generation now. And I don't have offspring, so some of that history, when I go, is gonna be gone. So I think I'm almost out of time, but I do appreciate your time, and I appreciate being invited back, and Dr. Boyer and the society allowing me this time. Thank you.
You were there when Jackie discovered her relatives.
Yeah.
All right. Now, our next presenter was going to present some of his research last year. Some of you may recall the weather around Tallahassee last year, and unfortunately that created some issues. We are fortunate to have Dr. Sylvester Peck here, and he's going to present on, one moment, the Union Pallbearer Society and its relationship to one of our sites here. Sylvester, please come on up.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling me doctor, but it's just Mr. right.
That's what I figured.
Well, good afternoon.
Yeah.
I am Sylvester Peck Sr. I am an educator, 30-year educator, as Dr. Boyer, and I want to congratulate you as being named Teacher of the Year at Jefferson County High School System. That's a big honor. Okay, now, my students always tell me to be brief in terms of my presentation, so I'm going to see if I can do the very same thing here. Now, Dr. Boyer mentioned the tornado from last year, and so we were very antsy about today because the tornado did strike our house, and we're just almost to get the damage repaired. And our contractor said that give me 5 or 6 more days and I have it complete. Still antsy. Okay. This presentation, and I'm going to go through very quickly. I put this image up. I do not have the PowerPoint as everyone has because technology. I spent just about all night long trying to pull everything back up and piece it together and have everything ready for today, and it just would not work. And I get down here and it's the same thing. So it may be system-wide and not just me. Okay. I am going to read, and Dr. Boyer, very good job on that presentation. I am going to read my little blurb, but also I want to share something with Jackie that she mentioned that's very important to all of us, and that is how we see cemeteries. I don't get scared when walking out into a cemetery because I believe the cemeteries are libraries, and each interned person is a book with a story to be told. And if we looked at them that way, we start to appreciate the people who lived in a particular place and the story that they shared. Because if we want to know what a place looked like, then we look at the people who are buried in that community. Everything may be gone from around them, but you pull up their lives, you start reading back through that history, and then you start to, mentally, you start to see the community come alive through that person, through that book, that interred book there. Okay, very quickly, let me see now. Part of my presentation is this: the impact of mutual aid societies on Black communities in Jefferson County, Florida, the Progressive Grand Union Pallbearer Society, and New Home Burial Association Cemetery. African American history is a vital part of the American narrative. In Jefferson County, Florida, there's a need for more documentation and research regarding the African American population. Mutual aid societies have played an important role in this community's history. As new researchers engage in discovery and documentation, a more comprehensive narrative emerges. This paper aims to contribute to the African American story in Jefferson County by documenting family connections to the New Home Burial Association Cemetery for current residents and across multiple generations. Additionally, it will enrich the history of Jefferson County's communities by examining two mutual aid societies that have been essential to the growth of local Black communities: the New Home Burial Association and the Progressive Grand Pallbearers Society. These organizations are significant in strengthening family ties locally and nationwide. Now, putting things together, I'm a teacher, so we teach this way. We don't go strictly by the book. We take nuggets here and move them here, and nuggets from here and move them here. Because we're trying to teach and share knowledge and make sure that process is a reciprocating process. So I'm going to do that too. So I generated some questions that I want you to think about as I go through the rest of it. For the mutual aid societies, I want you to ask yourself the question: what are mutual aid societies? Why did or do they exist? When did they begin? How much impact did they have on American life? Mutual aid societies in Jefferson County, what was their impact? For the Progressive Grand Union Pallbearer Society, when was it founded, organized? Who did it serve? Does it still exist? New Home Burial Association. How do we show and document family connection between the New Home Burial Association Cemetery for current residents across multiple generations? What is the New Home Burial Association? What was the membership? What is its legacy? Mutual aid societies. During the late 19th and 20th centuries, and I'm sorry, I didn't put this citation on this. One of my favorite historical writers, Dr. Boyer, is Dr. David Beto out of the University of Alabama. He's written several books on the stuff that I like to read and research, and so he's my go-to researcher writer in terms of his history. So I'm reading some excerpts from people who reviewed his book as well as my own reading. During the late 19th and early 20th century, more Americans belonged to fraternal societies than to any other kind of voluntary association, with the possible exception of churches. Despite the stereotypical image of the lodge as the exclusive domain of white men, fraternalism cut across race, class, and gender to include women, African Americans, and immigrants. Exploring the history and impact of fraternal societies in the United States, Dr. Beto uncovers the vital importance they had in the social and physical lives of millions of American families. Much more than a means of addressing deep-seated cultural, psychological, and gender needs, fraternal societies gave Americans a way to provide for themselves with social welfare that would otherwise have been inaccessible. Beto argues, in addition to creating vast social and mutual aid networks among the poor and the working class, they made affordable life and health insurance to their members and established hospitals, orphanages, and homes for the elderly. Fraternal societies continued their commitment to mutual aid even into the early years of the Great Depression. Beto says, with changing cultural attitudes and the expanding welfare state eventually propelled their decline. Excuse me. African Americans made significant gains economically, socially, and politically from the development of their own mutual aid organizations, owned and controlled by them. Inequality, racism, and politics greatly impacted Black lives in the South during and after the war and Reconstruction. These factors helped to forge the need for mutual aid groups. In Jefferson County, Florida, several important Black organizations were founded that led to significant improvement in local communities and other cities, and cities and communities in the state of Florida and southern Georgia. The Progressive Grand Union Pallbearers was one of those organizations founded in Jefferson County. And I think this is going to be significant aspect because Jackie was talking about deals. A lot of the cemeteries that are located in deals, the Progressive Grand Union Pallbearers was founded in deals it was organized June 12, 1898. A historical sketch from the 1940s attributes the founding of the organization to Jacob Berry, George McKeever, Sidney Johnson, and Peter Stokes of Monticello. Peter Stokes was also lived in that area. His father was Peter Stokes, and he also was on the Stokes plantation in that area. And so Peter Stokes, the senior, who died in 1885, left all of his land and stuff to his son, Peter Stokes Jr., who then went on to become one of the founding and also the first president of Pallbearers Society. Making sure I get back to my place here. The location of where the founding took place has never been in dispute, and it was quite specific in location, but let's go ahead and say that's Deals community. African American history is vital to the American narrative of Jefferson County. I'm sorry, I went back to the wrong page. Turn the page. The northern section of Linton's Mill precinct is the historic location where all of the attributed founders lived. The location's name is credited to Thomas Linton, a grain millwright who settled in the area of South Carolina around 1834. The location and benefits of the mill is documented in Schaffner's The History of Jefferson County, Florida. And I'm sorry, I got mixed up a note this way. I had handouts that I was going to pass out, but technology. The impact of mutual aid societies on blacks in Jefferson County, Florida, primarily came about through the Progressive Grand Union Pallbearers Society. That was the most dynamic organization that was started in Jefferson County, Florida, and took over and went on throughout the state of Florida. Now, Jackie presented with the Masonic emblem on the grave. Well, the majority of mutual aid societies in the United States of America, starting back, I think Beatles takes about 17 something. All of them are based in terms of structure on Masonic order. Even the smallest organization, the same order, sometimes the same oath in all of the other rituals and stuff that go on. Okay, so it's not unusual to see Masonic emblems everywhere because the majority of people, as Beto states, a third of the people in the United States of America belong to a mutual aid or fraternal society. A third. And where is that today? There's still a large number of people who belong to mutual aid or fraternal societies. Okay? And with that being said, I'm going to go back and talk about some of the questions, some of the things. Dr. Boyer mentioned this about the relationship of people who lived in a community in the cemeteries and those people who are still there. I am a product of the people who are buried in New Home Burial Association Cemetery. As I go down there, sometimes you hear me talking about, speak to my great-grandmother Jane Madry, Mary Jane F.H. Madry. She's buried in that cemetery. She died in July 17, 1935, and I think was buried there in July 18, 1935. And she was 80-something years old. My other grandparents or grandcessors, that I call them, the F.H.'s and the Madrys also buried there. And we have one significant event that I think we're all celebrating right now is that we had a soldier who was buried there in 1923, and that is Dave Jones. And just recently, we were on a research junket to find his family, living family members in the area to celebrate this because he's a soldier and a new headstone is going to be placed because the other one was destroyed by a local landowners who somehow fenced in this cemetery as part of his property, even though the cemetery itself has its standalone deed. Okay, so Dave Jones, I was working, and one thing about research is you start off with your question, you ask the right question, you can get the right answer. And so I was trying to track back Dave Jones from the time that he was born all the way up to the time that he was dying and trying to find his family. And so it got me to nowhere. I think it got us to nowhere. So I changed the question, changed the research method of looking, and looked at who requested the headstone for Dave Jones. And went back from there. I said, no one requests a headstone unless there's some relation to the person. And come to find out that the person who requested the headstone was Dave Jones, one of his older brothers, younger brothers, I'm sorry. And that was requested in 1948. And so with that being said, we were able to find the rest of his family, and one of the persons who listened to and read our research notes and stuff, our Facebook post. She is a relative of Dave Jones. She screamed when I talked to her the other night, shortly after I made it known to them that we found relatives of Dave Jones. Dave Jones also a relative of a soldier who passed away. Paul Jones, Paul Jones would have been Dave Jones' nephew. He was a soldier, he served in, I think, Vietnam War. He died in 2022. I wish that we could have had that information before he passed away, Paul Jones. Okay? And so the New Home Burial Association is very significant in that it was also founded by former enslaved people who worked for the John Parkhill's descendants. The land, they signed a sharecroppers contract, and all the people on that sharecroppers contract were also members of New Home Burial Association back then. And so the majority of those people are probably buried there. Okay? And so New Home Burial Association is very significant to the work that we do, very significant to our solar research, very significant to African American history in Jefferson County. The Progressive Grand Union Power Burial Association, I'm just going to sum it up this way, is one of the most significant organizations in African American history in the state of Florida, starting in Jefferson County. At its height, it had over 22,000 members, over $15 million in assets, over 170-something lodges across the state of Florida, floral courts, and everything else. And it had probably most of a very sophisticated moral code for membership. Okay? One of the things, I can read this, I got 5 minutes, I'm winding down. Was that if you stole something, or you would call stealing, you were not put out forever, and especially if you were an officer, but you were removed from office and you were put out for a year. And then you had an opportunity to, I guess, repay your dues from that period on and rejoin the association. Because the association was to help the community in terms of burying the dead and supporting families and not letting them become destitute because of a death in the family. Okay? And I'm 2 minutes, and I'm going to say thank you very much for listening to my babbling. And thank you for allowing me to be here.